Hi, I'm Jill Taylor. Welcome to Authority, our newest segment on The Wire. Joining us today is Michael Hawley, real estate attorney with Lyons Dougherty and a frequent contributor on The Wire. Doug and I have both buying and selling clients in real estate deals where stucco has been an issue. Having previously produced stucco seminars with construction expert Jules Falcone, we've come to learn that stucco itself is a perfectly fine building material. It's been used for hundreds of years, and it's not really the stucco itself that's defective, but the construction methods used in the building of the stucco home that can cause the problems. We'll have Jules back on another episode of Authority to discuss the construction side of stucco. Today we're focusing on the legal side. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Jill. It's good to be back.
As professional real estate agents, Doug and I know of many cases where a seller does not want to pay the entire cost of a full stucco remediation, so in turn they opt for a spot fix on the home. Can we discuss some more specific legal examples and what this can mean for the buyers and sellers involved?
Absolutely, and practical application is really the key here in terms of understanding the entire dynamic. One of the things that struck me when you were doing the intro is the qualification that stucco is indeed a product that's been around for a long time. And stucco in and of itself is a suitable building material and a suitable exterior finish. However, the problems that we encounter on both sides of the transaction, whether it's buyers or sellers, is the installation methods. And kind of rewinding a little bit, over the past couple of decades, stucco's become very, very popular as an exterior building finish. It provides a lot of versatility in color, in texture, combined with stone, things of that nature. However, what happened is that anybody who knew how to wield a trowel pronounced themselves a stucco expert.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately for buyers, unfortunately for sellers. Because what happens is if the stucco is not applied properly, if it doesn't have the correct underlayment, if it doesn't have the proper screening, if it doesn't have what are called weep screeds, which allow for moisture to drain away from the structure, if there is not appropriate grading at the base to move water away from the foundation, then you run into all kinds of problems. What you typically see are water infiltration problems around doors, dormers, windows in particular.
It's very important to make sure the windows are actually flashed properly, installed by a very competent contractor as well.
Yes, it's a blend of a number of construction disciplines. You have to have a competent window installer who puts the windows in properly in the first place. And you have to have a good window product, not just what I would call base construction grade. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's just throwing the windows in there, getting them at a bargain price because they're buying in such volume. And they're not good quality windows to begin with. And then perhaps you get an install that is not necessarily up to snuff in terms of construction trade standards. And then you have someone who is not really a stucco installer, but believes that he can get up there, put the product on, make it look nice. And it does look nice for a period of time, but it doesn't have the requisite install techniques to make it weatherproof moving forward.
And what many people mistakenly believe, you have to see the damage on the exterior. Just because you see some discoloration doesn't mean that you have water or mold issues behind the stucco.
No, it doesn't at all. And really the only reliable tests that can be used to determine if there is a defect in the stucco that's creating a water infiltration problem is invasive testing, where a knowledgeable professional such as Jules comes in and does some drill holes and things of that nature, perhaps takes some core samples, does a water penetration test, and there are different tools that are used to measure how much moisture is within a particular area of a home, in and around the windows, in and around the doors, in the walls themselves. And that's the indicator. That's the gold standard. A reading above X level tells you that it's unacceptable, that you have water infiltration in there. And then it gets to be a pervasive problem because it will get into the structure itself. It will adversely affect wood, interior wall coverings. It can create...
And you don't know this without the invasive test. And unfortunately, oftentimes you need to have the stucco removed to look behind the walls to see if there's any further structural damage in the home.
Yes, you do. And even with that, and you mentioned doing a partial remediation rather than a whole remediation. In my experience, that has been a Band-Aid on an arterial bleed. Doing patchwork is a poor substitute for overall stucco remediation.
Doug and I have found that the home may pass immediately after that patchwork remediation has been performed, but down the road before the home's sold, other areas of the home may begin to fail. Now a buyer comes in, it's under contract. A buyer naturally is going to want their own inspection as well, very common. Other areas of the home fail. Now the seller is back in the same position. They're fighting more stucco issues with the home, and the home actually becomes stigmatized because of this.
Absolutely. And this is not limited to one structure in one isolated area, a lower priced home, something of that nature. This is pervasive within the building industry. I've seen everything from what we would typically call moderately priced homes to high dollar developments built by quality builders who have good reputations in the community, but they've used subs who, by all indications for them, were qualified stucco installers, and the subs then subbed it out to someone else who comes in with two guys in a pickup truck, and they mix up the stucco, they slap it on the walls. It looks great. It's fairly easy to put a nice finish on a stucco wall and make it look like it grew there. The problem comes in after, when it's been exposed to the weather and it doesn't have the necessary sills, flashing, weep screeds, things of that nature that actually suck the water in and direct it into the structure rather than away from it. And therein is the problem.
And we're seeing homes as new as 8 and 10 years old that can have stucco issues, all the way back to 30 years old. Just depends on the amount of damage. But it begins, and once it starts, it continues. It's not something that's going away until it's properly remediated. In the case where a seller feels they have completely remediated the home, moving forward, they've sold the home, it's under contract, and more issues arise. What type of recourse does the seller have for the contractor that came in doing the initial remediation?
I'm going to have to use the wiggle words for lawyers. It depends. What does the contract say between the seller and the contractor? Have they guaranteed that they're going to remediate all of the identified stucco issues? And if so, if they've done that and something else completely out of the realm of anybody's consideration at the time the contract was executed occurs, then the seller probably has no remedy under law. The key there, I think, is getting a good, qualified, well-regarded, competent contractor to come in and say, look, I am going to do this, but I'm not going to limit the scope significantly. I'm going to take a holistic view of this, and I'm going to look to every potential area where there's a problem, and I'm going to tell you what we need to do and what doesn't need to be done. Maybe it's a matter of replacing several windows and one side of the home. Maybe it's a whole house remediation, which gets very, very pricey.
Yes.
You're essentially rebuilding the home and then the interior structures. However, mold can easily develop in that moist, closed environment. That's a health hazard that no one wants in their home. It's something that if a buyer gets it and they find out afterward that in fact the seller knew or should have known of this problem, then that creates a big problem for the seller, as well as for the buyer who's now got a family in there or whatever the case may be, and is facing a mold problem along with structural defects, along with what I'll characterize but not try to minimize, a defect on the exterior of the building, which is cosmetic in one sense, but is structural in another, because that's the barrier between the outside elements and the interior of the home.
Right. And many times the contractor will offer limited warranty on the work. They may be a 1 year, 3 year, or specifics. If the seller feels in good faith that all of these criteria have been met, the house is sold, the buyer comes into the house, and now there are issues that they're finding with the stucco. Does the new buyer, the new homeowner, have any recourse against the contractor that performed the work for the seller?
The contractor that performed the work for the seller, no. That buyer does not have an action against that person, because there's a concept in the law called privity of contract. The contract was not between that contractor and that buyer. It was between the contractor and the seller. Now, hearkening back Law School 101, if in fact the buyer elects to bring a legal action against the seller may then decide to give the contractor an invitation to that particular party and say, hey, this wouldn't have happened in sum and substance had you not dropped the ball. It's a very, very sticky issue. It begins in terms of trying to avoid the problem with getting a quality contractor.
And, excuse me.
And a seller needs to make sure that that's so. And a buyer doesn't walk into this blindly. As we discussed in prior segments, it's very, very important that the buyer get their own inspection, a comprehensive inspection by a qualified inspector. With regard to stucco issues, somebody like Jules Falcone, it's the gold standard. Jules, I've worked with Jules in other matters. He is very thorough, he's very knowledgeable, he finds things that no one would ever think of. He identifies them, he says, look, this is not a deal breaker, it's just something you should know about.
And it's very important to have a competent inspector as well as a remediator. And we also advise our clients, have your inspection done by one party and your remediation done by a separate party, so you're covering all your bases here.
Yes, because a remediation expert is going to do just that. An inspector is going to identify the problem. The remediation person is going to know what needs to be done to fix that problem, eliminate that problem, and make sure that it doesn't return. There are methods, absolutely solid construction methods, by which these things can be addressed, but they have to be done right the first time, rather than done piecemeal and having to come back and fix something over and over and over again.
And the buyer needs to know, if they're purchasing a home that's been previously remediated, they need to be confident in what was done to the home previously, because now it's on them moving forward. The alternative is the scenario where during the buyer's inspections of the home it comes up, and now the decision is the seller going to remediate or is the buyer? I always like to tell the buyers, it's important, if you want to control the process and know what's going on with the construction and everything done for the remediation, the flip side to that is, once they've purchased the home and taken all of these responsibilities on their own, once that house is opened up, there may be additional structural damage that's behind the covers that was not easily seen before. Now the buyer's responsible for this, and they would not have recourse with the seller.
That's true, and this is such a pervasive problem that And it's very, very subtle in terms of how it's detected and how it presents within the home. There may truly have been no reasonable way in which the seller's remediation person or the seller would have known the nature and extent of what was behind that wall. It may not have even been there at the time the transaction took place, but it happened thereafter. And that's just the nature of a defective stucco process, because it's very, very subtle. It can look fine. By all appearances, it can be fine. You really need to have knowledgeable eyes on it.
And it's also important to realize that there are buyers' responsibilities on maintaining the home and the stucco once they've purchased it. So it could be through a negligence on the buyer's part that they didn't maintain the stucco appropriately after they purchased the home.
Absolutely. There are so many facets to this particular issue. So many that we can't cover them in one episode.
Absolutely. We'll be looking forward to some more episodes on this topic with you, Michael. And I think there's 3 great takeaways here. First of all, sellers, I think the sellers need to weigh the difference between doing a patch fix and the problem that maybe the deal falls apart during the inspection period because more problems arise. Looking at the buyer side, I think the buyer needs to understand what they're purchasing and be comfortable with the inspector that did the work, or inspector that looked at the home, and the contractor that did the work. And if they choose to do a price negotiation, they need to realize they're responsible for anything that is wrong once the house is opened up structurally moving forward. And Michael, what would you say would be a takeaway for real estate agents?
I would say that for agents, they need to be particularly diligent when they're representing buyers or sellers where you have a stucco home or a stucco building, because this is not limited just to residences. This goes to office buildings, commercial real estate, things of that nature. It's a very popular finish, stucco. And so they need to be diligent in advising their clients to obtain inspections, to look at what it is that they're getting if a seller is remediating something as a result of an inspection. Agents have to be very, very careful because this is something that they're absolutely going to encounter, and diligence is the key.
Michael, all great takeaways. If you like what you saw today and you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode of Authority. And if you'd like to hear this as a podcast, go to the iTunes Music Store and search Authority. On Facebook, like and share. Leave us a comment and let us know what topic you'd like to hear us cover on Authority. And why, Michael?
Well, Jill, because real estate is a whole lot more than just land, buildings, and houses.
It's about the people and the communities where they live, work, and play. Until next time, I'm Jill.
I'm Michael.
Thanks for watching.
AC, bang, rock the house, pow. Come on, help me turn it out. I'm MD, bang, and I rock the house, yeah. You know I'm gonna turn it out, young.